the teacher who fed her students from her own salary. The school sat at the edge of a dusty settlement, where the roads cracked under the sun, and the air carried the smell of smoke from cooking fires. Every morning, Madame Elenam walked through that settlement with slow, thoughtful steps. She greeted the market women laying out tomatoes whose skins wrinkled in the heat. She waved to the mechanics who wiped grease from their hands to salute her. Everyone knew her. Everyone respected her. Teaching was not merely her job, it was her calling. But that particular term, she sensed something changing. The children walked differently. Shoulders drooped, faces thinned. Their laughter, once loud and unrestrained, now came out in half-hearted echoes. Some mornings, they stared at their empty desks before even greeting her. It was hunger, raw, silent, unforgiving hunger. She tried to distract them with stories, with songs, with games. But hunger is a stronger force than any lesson. It drags down the spirit. It steals concentration. It dims the brightest eyes. Then came the day little Sirwa collapsed. A hush fell over the classroom. Desks scraped. Books dropped. Eyes widened. Her small body trembled on the floor, and Madame Elenam rushed to her, heart pounding. She whispered the girl's name. She touched her forehead. She searched her pulse. Weak. But there, the headmaster called her later and sighed heavily, as though he carried the weight of the entire village on his shoulders. "It's the economy," he said. "Families can barely afford supper, let alone breakfast." Then he added, voice low, "But there is nothing we can do." Madame Elenam left his office with a tightness in her chest. Nothing we can do. For the rest of the day, those words followed her like a shadow. She went home, opened her purse on the table, and counted her salary. She did it 3 times, hoping the numbers would somehow change. They didn't. She lived modestly. She budgeted carefully. But there was barely enough for one person, certainly not a class of 30 hungry children. Still, she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered Serwa's limp body, the boy who chewed on his pencil because he wanted the taste of something, the girl whose stomach growled loudly enough for the whole classroom to hear, the child who pretended to tie his shoelaces so no one would notice he was dizzy. By dawn, she had made her decision. When she arrived that morning, the children found bowls waiting for them. Warm porridge, small fruits, bread thick enough to fill the belly. They stared at it with disbelief, then at her with gratitude too big for words. For the first time in weeks, the classroom buzzed with energy. The lessons flowed smoothly. The eyes that once darted around in discomfort now focused with curiosity. The children laughed again, real laughter that shook the walls. And Madame Elenam felt something soft bloom inside her, a quiet joy that made the sacrifice lighter. But the sacrifice did grow heavier. Her salary was never enough. She began skipping meals herself. She wore old shoes a little longer. She learned which foods were cheapest on which days. She walked instead of taking transport. And yet, every morning she arrived at school with the same gentle smile, carrying bags filled with hope disguised as food. Her fellow teachers noticed, but said nothing at first. They admired her silently, unsure how to help. Some offered small contributions. Others prayed for her strength. The headmaster pretended not to know the full extent of her sacrifice, but admiration softened his voice every time he spoke to her. One day, a local journalist visited the school for an unrelated story. He expected to see typical challenges: cracked walls, broken chairs, worn-out books. What he didn't expect was the sight of children eating steaming bowls of food before class. "Who provides this?" he asked. The children pointed to her. He followed her after school, watched as she bought groceries with careful calculations, stretching each coin with the skill of someone who had learned to turn scarcity into abundance. He watched her carry the heavy bags home with quiet determination, and he felt something tighten in his throat. His article came out 2 days later, with a headline that stirred the nation. People argued, debated, praised, criticized. Why should a teacher use her own salary? Why were children starving? What did this say about society? The story swept across the country like wildfire. Soon, government officials visited the school. Taken aback by what one woman had been doing alone, they listened as parents spoke with trembling voices about how their children depended on those meals. They followed the teacher's daily routine and watched her pour her heart onto every plate. The Minister of Education called for an emergency meeting. Within weeks, a nationwide school feeding program was announced, structured, funded, and designed to reach every child in need. Her small classroom became the seed of a movement that spread across regions, towns, and villages. At the official launch ceremony, dignitaries gave speeches full of praise and promise. Cameras flashed, banners waved, but Madame Elinam stood at the far end of the crowd, half hiding behind the taller teachers, hands clasped as if trying to make herself smaller. She didn't feel like a hero. All she ever wanted was to keep her students alive long enough to learn. But when the minister spotted her and motioned for her to come forward, the crowd parted. Children she once fed ran to her, hugging her waist, clutching her arms, calling her name. Her eyes shimmered with tears. She tried to blink away. A reporter leaned toward her with one final question. "What guided you through all this?" Her voice was soft, trembling, but steady. "No child should faint before they dream," she said. "And if their families cannot help them, then their teacher must." Those words echoed across the country. They appeared on posters, in newspapers, in speeches. They became a reminder that true leadership often begins not from authority, but from compassion. And long after the cameras left, the meals continued. Because one woman, one teacher with a gentle heart and a will made of iron chose not to walk away when her students needed her most. In villages and cities, in crowded classrooms and rural huts, children were fed, minds were nurtured, and dreams were restored. And somewhere in that same dusty little school, Madame Elinam still walked through the gate each morning, carrying her books and her quiet strength, believing that change always begins with one person who refuses to ignore suffering. Her country called her a hero. Her students called her a mother. But she insisted she was simply a teacher. A teacher who believed that feeding a child was the first step to teaching them to fly. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.